The deer hunt. In 1957, the state of Ohio reinstituted deer hunting. Deer had been hunted to near extinction in Ohio and other Midwestern states decades earlier. At some later time, the state of Ohio Department of Natural Resources released captured white-tailed deer in various wooded areas around the state. Now the herds had grown to a population that would again allow deer hunting, and the old man entered the lottery for a license and won. The season began in early December and ran for 3 days. Few licenses were awarded those first few years, and the old man was a bit of a celebrity. The little restaurant in Mantua was filled with locals on any Saturday morning, and they were all eager to talk about the hunt. The old man wore a black and red checkered wool coat with a game pocket and a hat to match, and he stood out in a crowd of taller men, every one of whom had advice on where to hunt, what to wear, the best sort of gun to use, and a host of other details about hunting an animal many of them had never seen in the wild, much less hunted. A neighbor with whom the old man rode to work insisted that he had the perfect deer gun. The state of Ohio limited guns for deer hunting to shotguns firing slugs or buckshot. The old man had a 20-gauge Winchester Model 12 pump-action shotgun with modified choke, but he had intended to borrow a 12-gauge. The neighbor insisted his was better. When he brought it to the house, the old man laughed at first. The gun was a long-barreled 410-gauge slug gun designed specifically for deer hunting. It fired a 41 caliber slug, a relatively small round compared to a 12-gauge or even a 20-gauge. The 410 is the only shotgun whose gauge designation is also a rifle and pistol caliber. This gun was similar to the Winchester Model 12 pump action, but was called a Model 42 with a barrel the length of a 12-gauge. It had rifle sights fore and aft on a raised rib. It was chambered for 3-inch Magnum shells, standard shells are 2 3/4 inches long, and the barrel was floated above the forestock. The barrel wasn't rifled, but the slugs themselves were. The gun was essentially a short-range rifle and shot as true at 50 yards as a .30-30 rifle. Its only drawback was a supposed lack of punch. The heavier slug of a 12 or 16 gauge or even 20 gauge would, it was believed, knock a deer down. The truth was that the muzzle speed of the 410 made up for most of the difference in mass. There was no essential difference as attested by the ability of much smaller rifle rounds to successfully kill much larger animals than white-tailed deer. The old man accepted the gun. The first day of the hunt, the old man woke us early. My brother and I dressed for the cold we knew was coming. The old man wore his red and black coat. There was no Blaze Orange then, and insulated leather hunting boots from Beretta, waterproofed with mink oil, a substance guaranteed to render any leather boot waterproof if applied according to directions. The night before the hunt, the old man had spent a goodly amount of time scrubbing mink oil into every stitch line on each boot with a toothbrush and wiping every service over and over with a mink oil-covered sponge. We drove about a half an hour to a patch of public land that was mostly scrub, second-growth trees, brush, and swamp. We parked off the road and crossed a rolling, abandoned field of grass and scrub to the woods. Northeast Ohio was at the end of the glacier's advance 12,000 years ago, and the land was flattened and then plowed into huge rolls and furrows as the glaciers advanced and retreated. Although the field looked flat, walking it was hard. The rolls and furrows were as much as man-high from top to bottom. Once into the woods, the old man selected a heavily wooded patch that overlooked a game trail and parked my brother and me there. It was coming on 9 o'clock, the official start of opening day. Later days would start at sunrise, but there was fear of too many men with too many guns hunting in unfamiliar territory for an animal they might not recognize, so opening day started at 9. "Stay here, boys." The old man kicked leaves aside and ground the butt of his unfiltered Camel cigarette into the dirt beneath the forest duff. "I'm going to make a circle and look for fresh tracks. I'll be about a half an hour." He moved off to the right. The leaves were dry and the brush rattled whenever my brother or I moved, but the sounds of the old man's passage faded in seconds. I never learned to do that, although Giles did. I did learn to be better at it than anyone else I ever hunted with, but never as good as the old man or my kid brother. After a few minutes, my brother pulled out a pack of the old man's Camels and offered me one. "The deer will smell it," I said. "So? We don't have guns." He had a point. I took one. What about the old man? He's half a mile away. My brother scratched a kitchen match on his jeans, lit his cigarette, and offered the light to me. I lit up, in for a penny. There was a shot not far away. The old man swore. My brother and I frantically buried our smokes. A second shot, and then, "Come help me drag this deer, boys." We began fighting through the scrub. I almost tripped over the deer. We had only come about 200 yards. "Well, it's a good thing I shot this one, because you two have made enough noise to move every other deer in this woods to Pennsylvania." The old man was happy. He was only ever sarcastic when he was either very happy or very angry. He had no reason to be angry. The deer was a large, corn-fattened doe. He pulled a rope and a small block and tackle from his game pocket and sent my brother up the nearest sizable tree. My brother affixed the block to the largest low branch and lowered the tackle. The old man had roped the doe's rear legs together at the heel, and he hooked up the tackle to the rope. My brother came down, and we hauled the deer up. The old man bled and gutted her, and we lowered her back to the ground. My brother clambered back up the tree and retrieved the block. The old man stuffed it back into his game pocket and retrieved it from the deer haul halter I'd given him for Christmas the year before. He put it over the doe's head and attached it to both ends of the longer rope from the block and tackle, forming a loop. "Grab on, boys." The old man stepped into the loop. We each took a side and began to pull forward. Unfortunately, the expected cold and snow had not materialized. We were pulling dry. The good news was we were less than a half mile from the car. The bad news was twofold. The rolling field was going to be a lot less fun crossing with a deer in tow over dry ground, and that deer was heavy. We pulled and we hauled. We stopped and we blew. We traded the shotgun from one to another. We pulled and hauled and we stopped and blew again. We swapped the gun again. At the bottom of the highest roll, we looked up to see a small plane flying toward us. He dropped toward us and dipped his wings, turned sharply, and did it again. "Del Freight," the old man muttered, stopping. "What are you doing?" "Who's Del Freight?" I asked. "Game warden. See the green and white colors? That's a DNR plane." He picked up the rope. "It took us a half an hour to make the top of the rise, a horizontal distance of maybe 100 feet, with an elevation change of 10, and I may have mentioned that doe was heavy. Del Freight and his airplane found other places to be. Once we topped the rise and could see the car, things seemed to get a little easier. We pulled steadily, and about 100 yards from the car, we ran across a small stretch of shadowed snow and learned why De Freight had been buzzing us. The buck's tracks were huge. He's trying to drive it to us, not knowing that our only license was filled. The old man laughed. "I'll have to thank him for trying, but that old buck could have walked right up to us and we couldn't have done a thing." We tied the doe onto the old 50 Studebaker and headed for home. The old man hadn't successfully hunted deer in a good many years. He showed it off to everyone he could think of, even driving into Mantua on his way to the meat packing plant in Ravenna. A few days later, we had venison stew. That was the best meal of the winter.